Tell him to bring out the Red Bull.
Tell him to bring out the Red Bull.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Not Another Formula One podcast. This week we're in Miami. Oh boy, what a week. Speaking of Miami, GTA 5, no, 6, I'm sorry, pushback for another year. Isn't that disappointing? Anywho, to the race weekend we go. Oh, this was the second sprint weekend of the year. And of all the people to claim pole position for sprint qualifying would be Kimi, Andrea, Andrea, Kimi, and Tonelli. Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris finish out the top three. And quite shamefully, Charles Leclerc crashed on his way to the grid. And this weekend didn't get any better for Ferrari. So of course, the sprint race goes on. Oscar absolutely bodies Kimi in turn one, as kind of expected. Oscar is showing he's getting pretty good at starts. Sprint race, however, was rather boring as hell. Lando ended up winning it, followed by Oscar Piastri and Lewis Hamilton. Now, my predictions from last week said, I believe my second one, was that Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton specifically, would get a podium. Now, it was in the sprint race, so I guess that counts. +1 for me. The pit lane incident. Red Bull have really lost their shit with the pit stops. It just has not been going well lately. And, luckily the damage wasn't any worse for either driver. And Max receives a 10-second penalty for an unsafe release. Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso would then go on to retire for, random whatever reasons that backfield cars tend to retire for. Well, I don't know. Williams hasn't really been much of a backmarker team this year. In fact, they're still holding strong in fifth, which, if you remember in my short video of my championship constructors championship rankings, I said that Williams would get fifth, and they are firmly in fifth. Anyways, we'll move on to the race. Actually, no, qualifying for the race later that afternoon. Max Verstappen once again puts in another God lap that sees him take pole by, just a few hundredths of a second. I believe it was maybe 600ths of a second. Something crazy like that, because that's just what he does. On the other side of the garage is a different story, though, for Yuki, who in Q1, for whatever reason, did not make the start line in time. And it was primarily because of Max. Max was really slowing up down at the last turn, or maybe not the last turn, but the end of the back straight. And I think Yuki missed it by maybe 2 seconds. Quite shameful from Red Bull. But, it was probably some of his own mistake as well. He could have gone. You got to be aware of where you're at in the time. Lewis Hamilton was knocked out in Q2. He's not really feeling this Ferrari. Moving on to Q3. Of course, Max took pole, followed by Lando Norris and Andrea Kimi. I keep messing up his name. Forgive me. Andrea, Kimi, and Tonelli, who, for the second time in a row, qualified George Russell, which is quite the feat. George Russell didn't really seem to have grip of the car this weekend until the race, conveniently, but that was due to probably one of the better strategy calls of the weekend. And a lot of luck from the virtual safety car, but I'll get into that. So we start the race, and as per usual, Lando tries to make a move on Max Verstappen. And I think after last year, Max has really lost racing respect for Lando and does not care about him on the track at all. The only person I think Max respects is Oscar Piastri, and deservedly so. Um, there's all these complications about when you're coming side by side and who's entitled to the turn, and it's just so much FIA paperwork. But at the end of the day, if you're side by side with Max Verstappen, it probably is his corner. But as the race goes on, Max goes to hold off Oscar Piastri for about 20 laps until he just couldn't anymore. Very limited in the Red Bull in certain aspects of the track, as opposed to Oscar, and Oscar knew this and was able to get him. I believe it was at turn 1. But once Oscar got ahead, it was his race, and there was nothing that could stop him, in my honest opinion. And I knew this. Lando Norris made some cracking overtakes, I might say, to get himself past Max Verstappen eventually. Also at turn 1 in the first lap, the whole, Liam Lawson and Jack Doohan? I'll never get his name right, and quite frankly, I don't care. Come to blows at turn 1, which gave Jack a puncture that no one cared about. Liam Lawson was able to carry on, though, so that was some upside for his weekend. I think I forgot to mention how he came to blows with Fernando Alonso in the sprint race as well, so I'm sure a lot of Spaniards are probably pissed off at Liam. You can't forget about his tangle with Sergio Perez back in Mexico. What was it, last year? Days fly by, I can't remember much. Oh, and I also forgot to mention the driver's parade. That was definitely probably the funnest moment of the year, watching all the drivers drive 10 life-size Lego cars that somehow fit 2 people and go probably about top speed, 12 miles per hour, 20 kilometers per hour? You do the math. Anywho, back to the race. So, it's Oscar followed by Lando and Max until a virtual safety car. There was 3 virtual safety cars this race, which didn't really shake much up at all besides Max losing third place to George Russell. George Russell, as I mentioned earlier with the strategy call, started on hards. Ended up being a bad move at first, but later on into the race, if you just keep on those hards, you're bound to get a free pit stop somewhere. And it really helped him out. He came ahead of Max. Good for him, I guess. George Russell really is the embodiment of that meme that keeps showing up, the does nothing P3. George Buzz Lightyear strikes again. The first half of this race was great. The back half was boring, unless you're a big fan of Ferrari issues, which seems to be, it's always been a recurring issue. I don't know why Ferrari can't seem to get it together these days. I think there's probably just too many people involved. Because every time the drivers ask the pit wall what's going on, they always have to check. They're always checking. Why are you always checking? Just make a decision. Like I said, the back half of the race was boring, but watching the 2 Ferraris, scramble for 8th and 9th, or 7th and 8th, was ridiculous. The radio calls were wild, to say the least. Lewis was not holding back, or was being very, very British about it, telling his team that they can go have a cup of tea, while they make a decision. Might as well. might stir up some thought. They're fighting about who's ahead of who. The tires weren't great for either of them. Lewis probably was faster, but who knows? They're holding off a Williams, which if you'd have said, even just a year ago, that the Ferraris would be in a really, really tough fight with the Williams for fourth place, you'd probably be confused, shocked even. But it goes on. Charles is ahead of Lewis, with Carlos Sainz a little too close behind. That last back straight lunge at Lewis definitely had some anger behind it. This is the guy that stole his seat. Now he's fighting with him in a Williams. You kind of knew Carlos would want to put up a fight with the Ferraris if he could in that car. And he really gave it to Lewis. And shamefully blamed it on, understeer? Or locking up? No, he wanted it bad from Lewis. But did not achieve it. Fernando Alonso had a very random spin. I predicted last week that Fernando would score at least a point this weekend. Once again, that didn't happen. In fact, Lance Stroll managed to score more points than Fernando Alonso this weekend. Really adding on to my strange claim that Lance Stroll is carrying Aston Martin this year. They're still definitely the second worst car. Actually, they're probably the worst car. I'd say that the Kick-Sauber, Audi, whatever team probably is the better car. But if you look at 2023, we've come such a long way from 2023, has Aston Martin. What happened? And then, of course, Big Yuki, Daddy Yuki, who had a very good social media week, got to speak to the legend DJ Khaled. As I said in the beginning, bring out the Red Bull!
Tell him to bring out the Red Bull!
Tell him to bring out the Red Bull! Thank you, DJ Khaled, for giving us all the memes. And thank you, Yuki Tsunoda, for being our king. Had a great race, coming from the back to start or to finish in 10th place, securing at least a point. Someone's got to put points up in that second Red Bull seat, and I'm glad it's him. So the race finishes. Oscar Piastri ahead of Lando Norris, and then George Russell, the P3 king. Oscar Piastri hits the meanest gritty you've ever seen. Just really Fortnite emoting it. Apparently he lost a bet to Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Probably one of the best post-race celebrations I've ever seen. Besides that one Fernando Alonso dance where he has his arms behind his back. Look it up. So to give a top 10 finishers, Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, George Russell, Max Verstappen, Alex Albon, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz, and Yuki Tsunoda. Oscar Piastri giving me another point to my predictions that I gave last week, saying when I said that he would secure another win, being the first driver since Max Verstappen to win 3 in a row. So we've got next weekend off, and then we get to Imola, a track where Max Verstappen has won the last 3 Grand Prix, 2021, 2022, and 2024. 2023 having not happened due to that severe flooding. Historically, Red Bull has not done so well here, but to start my predictions, I will say that Red Bull will not have such a great weekend here. And I hate to say this as a Red Bull fan, but I'm going to say that maybe these upgrades that they're bringing, allegedly, the major upgrades, aren't going to be the best. But who knows? My other prediction will be that Oscar Piastri will win his 4th Grand Prix in a row. And my third prediction will be that Andrea Kimi Antonelli will finish on the podium for the first time in his F1 career. Because he's on a bit of a tear as well. He's Italian. And I think it's only right that he gets a podium here. But that'll do it for this episode of Not Another Formula One podcast. Thank you a whole bunch for listening. I hope you like, comment, and subscribe. All the things that make a channel grow. Until next time, everybody. Tell them to bring out the Red Bull!
Tell them to bring out the Red Bull!